we don't know how many more might be coming or whether the air defense systems might be overwhelmed. There are just too many unknowns. There's also danger of falling debris when those projectiles are intercepted. It does feel like an ominous escalation here tonight, Whit.
Yes, we've been hearing reports of the potential hundreds of drones and or missiles on their way to Israel. And Britt, just to clarify, at this moment, do we have any word that any of these projectiles have actually landed or hit infrastructure or buildings?
There are reports, Whit, but nothing confirmed yet. Here in Jerusalem, we haven't ourselves seen anything being actually landed or launched and actually successfully fallen on any targets or any civilian infrastructure here. So at the moment, around from what we can see, it does seem like most of those projectiles have been intercepted, Whit.
And Britt, one of the things that we've been hearing repeatedly day after day from Israeli officials is that they are not only prepared to defend, but ready to attack. What are those officials saying now after this attack has begun?
Well, Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, he came out and made it very clear that not only are air defenses ready, but that any country that hurts Israel will hurt it. And we've been hearing again and again from Israeli officials that any attack from Iran, launched directly from Iran, which is what we've seen tonight, and that will be a first in history, that they will respond with an attack on Iran. Today we've seen schools closed, gatherings banned until Monday night. The main airport has been shut. Israeli air defense has also been shut. So Israel very much hunkered down. At the same time, they're making it very clear that they can handle this and that they will respond.
All right, Britt Clennett for us. Please stand by and please stay safe. I know you and your team do have a shelter to get to if needed. Again, to our viewers, you're seeing some of this video right now. These are some of the projectiles, some of them drones. Unclear specifically what we're seeing and where this is, but we know that the Iron Dome and the intercepts have been at play, including assets from the United States. They have been responding and intercepting some of those projectiles. Let's bring in ABC's Chief Global Affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, who is joining us now on the phone. Martha, you've been sending some emails, some reports from your sources. What do we know about these missiles and drones that Iran is sending to Israel now?
With the U.S. official I've been speaking to this evening said they expect 400 to 500 drones and missiles to be heading towards Israel. That is clearly happening right now. As you know, a wave of drones were launched several hours ago. The missiles have been launched more recently, just about 150 missiles so far, but then that swarm of drones. And the Iranians have timed this so they all go towards their drones and missiles are headed towards 3 military facilities. They said they do not think they are purposely aiming at civilian areas, but these are not completely accurate drones or missiles, and there could certainly be, as Britt pointed out, some sort of damage from these, not only from the missiles or drones themselves that they may not be able to intercept, but from falling debris as well.
And Martha, we know that Israel has one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world. We talk about the Iron Dome and then the support from the U.S. now. Is it your sense in talking to your sources that the magnitude of this attack from Iran is a surprise in any way, or is this consistent with what they were expecting?
I think it is a surprise. I think it is larger than they expected, much worse than they expected, and they are so focused on trying to get these missiles and drones down. But even if they get 85% of them down, it's bound to hit something. They're bound to, for some of those missiles or drones to get through to their target. If right now what we're seeing, and Britt, they're right in the middle of it, seeing these swarms of drones, these swarms of missiles that really could overwhelm the system.
Stand by for us for a moment, if you could. I want to go back to Britt Clennett because, Britt, I understand you're hearing sirens right now in Jerusalem. If you're able to hear us, can you tell us what you're seeing, what you're hearing?
At the moment, we're not. That doesn't mean that it's not happening in other parts of Jerusalem, but this does seem to be a period of eerie quiet, especially after we heard those several interceptions and, as I say, the wailing of the air raid sirens. But as far as I can see, it doesn't seem like there are any interceptions at the moment or any imminent danger.
Okay, Britt, thank you. Martha, I'd like to bring you back in here because you were talking about the calculation from the U.S. And of course, for weeks, the move has been to try to prevent an escalation across the region. What does this do to our position right now? And how does the U.S. respond militarily?
I think the U.S. will do everything possible not to respond militarily. They want to put themselves in a defensive position to defend Israel, not to go after Iran. But what they are most worried about now is how Israel responds to this, what Israel does. And proportional, how do they look at a proportional after what they have just seen? If indeed there is loss of life, I would imagine that Israel's response will be larger than if there is not. And that's one of those things that the president and his national security team are talking about tonight. They have obviously been in touch with Israel all week, and the Israelis about how they would respond, trying to tamp this down. But with 400, 500 possible drones and missiles expected this evening, it's pretty hard to tell Israel what to do.
And Martha, we know that President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu have a frosty relationship. They had a conversation recently, but is there any suggestion that, when the U.S. or President Biden makes these pleas to Netanyahu and his government, that they would actually listen to them or continue to go forward with their own plans?
Well, over the several months, President Biden, of course, has been talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu, asking them to please let more humanitarian aid into Gaza, to please take more care with civilian casualties. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has basically said, this is our fight. Stay out of it, essentially. The White House keeps going back to them. They're getting stronger and stronger on that. And yet, this situation tonight is so unpredictable. We don't know how this will end. We don't know what will get through, if anything. We're obviously hoping nothing gets through to Israel, and all of these are shot down. But it is, just as you say, it's a very fraught relationship, and Israel is right in the middle of a huge escalation right now.
All right, Martha Raddatz for us, our Chief Global Affairs Correspondent. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate it. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang, who's been tracking all of this. Selena, we know that President Biden was supposed to be continuing his weekend in Delaware, but he went back to the White House early today to meet with his national security team. They were in the Situation Room. What are you hearing from the administration right now?
Exactly, what he cut his weekend trip short, and I'm told by officials that he has been holed up in the Situation Room for hours, and they're just wrapping that meeting up with his top national security advisors. The president, though, he's making very clear tonight that America's support of Israel's defense is ironclad, despite that very frosty relationship between Netanyahu and President Biden, as you were just talking about with Martha. He is making that distinction very clear. Now, look, the White House is on high alert. They've been on high alert for days, and officials tell me that anxieties here are running very high because the U.S. is very worried about how Israel could respond to this and how this could widen this war. This is exactly what the president has been avoiding thus far. He's been very careful to calibrate and to message to all of the partners and allies to Israel not to escalate and to contain this.
President Biden was asked this week, what's your message to Iran if they're considering an attack on Israel? His message was pretty blunt. He said, don't. That said, Selena, the White House has been pressed repeatedly about what the response would be from the U.S. We heard Martha talking about this, that the U.S., for the most part, in a supporting role here. But do you have any more information about what our involvement could be? I know that we sent new additional resources to the region. We're talking ships and manpower. What can you tell us about that?
Exactly what I mean. The U.S. was trying to prepare for this situation, though they wanted to avoid this. So they were already surging military assets to the region because a big vulnerability here is U.S. forces. So they want to protect those U.S. forces in the region. And for days now, the U.S. has been telegraphing to Iran, as you say, do not do this. Do not target U.S. forces. The U.S. has made clear that they didn't know about this Damascus strike beforehand. They weren't involved in it. Their message to Iran is don't get us pulled into this. Don't get us involved. So that is very much the message the president has been delivering. It's unclear what this relationship like with Netanyahu is going to be going forward and trying to understand what the Israeli response is going to be. Remember, not too long ago, President Biden issued his strongest criticism of Netanyahu yet and said, if you don't do more, if you don't do enough to protect civilians in Gaza, then we could change our policy towards Israel. That could mean withholding U.S. aid if Israel doesn't do enough. And officials tell me that what the president has laid out in terms of getting more humanitarian aid in, opening those border crossings, officials tell me that is really the president's baseline. And if even that doesn't get accomplished, well, then we've got a problem here.
Selena Wang for us at the White House. Thank you so much. Let's bring in Colonel Steve Ganyard, our ABC News contributor. And Steve, I just want to talk about the unprecedented nature of this attack. Iran going after Israel directly within its borders. Have we ever seen anything like this?
Well, we've never seen an attack directly by Iran on Israel. That's unprecedented. But the numbers here are what's so amazing, Rick. 400 to 500 incoming drones and missiles. That's unprecedented for any air defense system. Now, we know that the Israelis have the most sophisticated and capable integrated air and missile defense capability. But 400 to 500 means that it probably is almost inevitable that some are going to get through. It's interesting to look at the kinds of videos that we see bringing from Jerusalem. We're talking about the Iron Dome, and everybody's familiar with the Iron Dome and what that does against some of the short-range missiles coming out of Gaza. But the Israelis have a layered defense. So it's Iron Dome at the lower altitudes. Then there's another system called David Sling, which is the medium altitudes. And then for very high ballistic missile intercepts, there's the Arrow 2 missile. And so a lot of what we seem to be seeing here is more of the David Sling. It's less Iron Dome. So David Sling, a bit of a newer system, but it does reach up higher, and it does seem to be intercepting these incoming Iranian attacks at a higher altitude.
So, Steve, let me ask you more about that because, you know, beyond the drones, and we're talking about potentially hundreds from Iran tonight, we also know that they have an elaborate ballistic missile system. Talk to us about the difference and the type of damage that these missiles could do. This is very different than like the rockets that we typically see being shot from like Gaza or from Hezbollah into Israel.
Right. There's still conflicting reports, Whit, about whether the Iranians actually have launched ballistic missiles. But that's what that Arrow 2 system is. It's a very high-altitude ballistic missile interceptor. So it's not easy to intercept ballistic missiles, but the Arrow 2 has proven quite capable. So that's the real concern here, because if Iran starts launching these long-range ballistic missiles, that is going to provoke Israel in a way to make sure that its response is going to be overwhelming. So what we see tonight with 400 to 500 missiles and drones coming inbound, I think that the Iranians have bought themselves a retaliatory strike that will be much more from the Israelis than they've provided tonight. Well, Israel has a lot more capability to project power than Iran does. So they have a very capable Air Force. They have F-35 stealth fighters, very capable F-15s. They have cruise missiles that can be launched from submarines and from ships. So the air power, the capability of the Israeli Air Force is far beyond anything that the Iranians have. And the Israeli Air Force can own the airspace over Iran. So between that and the ships at sea, the Israelis have a lot of options in how they retaliate.
Steve, another thing that has surprised a lot of people in watching this play out tonight, Jerusalem, not typically a place where you would see, you know, rockets or projectiles shot to. Obviously a mixed population. You have Jews, you have Muslims, and these holy sites. And you talked about the potential for something going wrong. Even if they weren't targeting a place like Jerusalem, if one of these projectiles or, you know, a rocket dropped and injured civilians, how significant would something like that be?
Yeah, well, apparently the Iranians would claim that they're only going after military sites. There is a significant missile base that is very close to Jerusalem, so that may be what Brett is seeing. and hearing. If they do go after military bases, then obviously the Israelis have put quite a bit of their air defenses around those military bases. But it's one of these things where the more that comes in, it's more of a problem to solve, and it makes it much more difficult for the Iron Dome and the David Sling and the Arrow to figure out what's incoming and a danger and what's not, with this idea that if you hit them, where does the debris go? Does it hurt people on the ground?
And Steve, let's talk about the U.S. here. We know that we're shooting down some of these projectiles, but what's the likelihood this draws us deeper into a regional conflict now?
This is a real concern, because we know that the Iranians earlier in the week were very clear that if the U.S. helped Israel defend against the attack that Iran said was coming, that U.S. forces in the region would become fair game. So we have forces in Iraq, we have forces in Jordan, we have forces in the Red Sea. So all of a sudden, after weeks of the Iranian surrogates not coming after U.S. forces in the region, we now know that these forces are now fair game and open to attack by Iran. So there's a real danger here that if Iran miscalculates and goes after U.S. forces, and it's clear that Iran was the instigator, then that could very easily draw the U.S. into a wider Middle East war.
That's truly been a major concern for months since that October 7th attack. Steve Ganyard, for much of this information throughout the evening. What more are you learning tonight? And have we heard any update on whether any of these projectiles from Iran have actually landed and done any damage in Israel?
It's unclear exactly from U.S. sources, if officially yet, whether something has actually landed inside Israel. What we are hearing from U.S. officials is that United States forces in the region are shooting down whatever drones or missiles may be headed towards Israel if they're capable. You spoke earlier about about additional assets being sent into the region. We are aware that 2 U.S. Navy destroyers are in the region, but I think that's more for long-distance intercepts. But we do know that the United States does have in both Iraq and Jordan some air defense systems, and it appears that at least some of those air defense systems were boosted in advance of this Iranian retaliation. And so therefore, one can assume that those missile systems have been used now to bring down at least some of these Iranian drones and missiles that have been headed towards Israel.
And Louis, we know that the U.S. added additional assets into the region. Can you talk more about that? And are we talking about potentially, like boots on the ground, not necessarily on the ground, but on battleships and whatnot throughout the region?
That's right. Not inside Israel proper. We are talking outside of Israel. That's where U.S. forces are located. We know that there are 2,500 U.S. forces inside Iraq, that there's about 900 that are inside of Syria, but there is also a sizable component inside of Jordan. And so those locations do have air defense systems already. So it's very likely that these air defense systems were boosted in advance of this retaliatory strike. In fact, we were told that the U.S. was sending more personnel to the ground there in the region, as well as air assets, so that means aviation aircraft, and also naval. And that's those 2 destroyers that we're talking about that are located in the Eastern Mediterranean. And what they do is they have the capability of shooting down both long-distance incoming missiles and shorter-range missiles. But I think as we're talking about U.S. forces shooting down these drones and missiles on their way to Israel, I think one can assume it's those shorter distance systems that the United States employs when it tries to shoot down anything that's incoming towards their bases.
And Louis, can I pick up on something that Steve mentioned there? I know we got to confirm that there were drones and missiles, but we were talking about the ballistic missile system that Iran has. Do we have any confirmation that they've launched any of those yet towards Israel?
No confirmation yet from officials that I've been speaking to with, but again, this is a developing situation, and one of the things that we've been told, as per Martha Raditz's reporting, is that overall the U.S. is anticipating somewhere between 400 and 500 drones and missiles being launched at Israel. That means this is going to take some time. So potentially some of those longer range and faster moving ballistic missiles could be used. But no, I don't have anything yet from any officials I'm talking to right now. If anything, we're talking about the cruise missiles that have been launched. And we should point out that even though it is a missile, cruise missiles do take some time to get to their targets as well. They are not as fast moving as ballistic missiles, which take a much faster, shorter time to get to a location because they go up higher in the air and then they strike at their targets.
Louis Martinez for us, thank you so much.